The smell of burnt garlic still hung in the air when I realized my hands were shaking. The kitchen lights felt too bright, slicing through the silence as I stared at the phone that would end my marriage. It's strange how a single moment can split your life into before and after, and how the world keeps breathing even when you forget to. If you've ever had your reality tilt under your feet, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. None of us expect to face moments like this. My heartbeat felt slow and heavy. As if my body already knew the truth, my mind was still resisting. I remember gripping the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself, feeling the first cracks forming beneath everything I thought was safe. That was the moment everything started to unravel. I still remember the exact second my life split open. I was standing in the kitchen of our condo in Charlotte, letting the quiet hum of the evening settle around me, when a soft glow lit up my husband's phone on the counter. In that moment, before I even touched it, something inside me already knew. My name is Ariana Lewis, and the world I thought I was living in shifted under my feet with a single message I was never meant to see. It was strange how calm everything looked. The polished counters, the simmering pot on the stove, the soft light above me, while my chest tightened with a truth I could no longer ignore. It felt as if the air thinned around me, as if I was watching my own life from a distance. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, sharp, and intimate, like a whispered confession meant for someone else. And as I stood there, frozen between the life I believed in and the reality unfolding in front of me, I felt something inside me begin to unravel. That was the moment I realized my perfect life had only been an illusion, waiting to crack. For years, our condo in Charlotte felt like the safest place in my world. The warm lighting, the soft hum of the dishwasher at night, the familiar creak in the hardwood floor near the hallway. Those small comforts shaped the rhythm of my life. I built so much of my identity around the quiet routines my husband and I shared. It all looked so steady from the outside, and for a long time, I convinced myself it still was. But the shift didn't happen all at once. It began with late nights explained away by workload, with him walking out to the balcony to take calls he said were quick check-ins, with a new cologne he never mentioned buying. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. I blamed my own stress, my own exhaustion. Yet the unease settled into my body long before the truth revealed itself. I remember noticing small charges on our statements that didn't match our usual spending. I remember the way he angled his phone away when notifications appeared, offering casual excuses that sounded almost rehearsed. And I remember how each sign felt like a whisper, brushing against the edges of my awareness, asking me to pay attention. Still, I tried to hold on to the image of the life we had built. I tried to believe that the warmth in our home meant something unshakable. But deep down, something inside me had already gone quiet, as if preparing itself for a truth I wasn't ready to face. And when the truth finally surfaced, that quietness became the only thing that kept me standing. I remember the moment my hand moved toward Marcus's phone, as if it belonged to someone else. The screen was still glowing from that notification, a soft reminder of the unease that had been living in my chest for weeks. When I picked it up, my fingers felt cold, almost weightless, like I was touching something that could change the shape of my entire life. And when I unlocked it, the truth met me without hesitation. There it was, a message from Tessa Malone. A message that didn't need explanation or context. It was the kind of message that draws a clean line between before and after. My heartbeat didn't race the way I expected it to. Instead, it slowed, sinking deep into my ribs. It felt strange, almost surreal, like my body was shutting down everything unnecessary so I could absorb the blow. As I stared at the screen, all the small hints I had tried to ignore suddenly snapped together. The late nights, the careful way he angled his phone away from me, the sudden desire to improve his appearance, the odd gaps in his stories. Each one, on its own, could have been harmless. Together, they became a truth I could no longer outrun. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just felt this heavy numbness settle over me, as if grief and clarity were arriving at the same time. In that moment, I realized betrayal doesn't always storm into your life. Sometimes it walks in quietly and sits beside you, waiting for you to finally acknowledge it. And as the reality took root inside me, I knew this was only the beginning. The numbness that washed over me after reading that message didn't fade. It settled into something colder, something steadier, as if my mind understood that falling apart would only trap me in the very place I needed to escape. I stood there for a long moment, letting the weight of the truth anchor me, and then a quiet clarity rose to the surface. If Marcus had shown me who he truly was, then I had to decide who I would be in response, and I chose not to be the woman who crumbled. My hands were steady when I picked up his phone again. It was strange, almost unsettling, how calm I felt. I opened the conversation that had shattered everything and typed a message that felt like a line drawn in the sand. I invited Tessa to the condo, pretending to be him, letting her believe I wasn't home. It was deliberate, precise, a small step toward reclaiming control in a situation that had taken so much from me. After sending it, I took a screenshot of their thread and forwarded it to myself. Then I moved through his phone with a quiet purpose, gathering anything that confirmed what my intuition had been screaming for weeks. When I finished, I deleted every trace of what I had done and placed the phone back exactly where he left it, down to the angle of the screen. For the first time that night, I felt my heart beat steady, not from peace, but from resolve. I knew what was coming. I knew this was only the beginning of a truth he never expected to face. And as the evening stretched ahead of me, I felt the tension shift. The victim in me was fading. The strategist was waking up. Dinner that night felt like stepping into someone else's life. I sat across from Marcus at our kitchen table, watching him move through familiar routines with the same ease he always had. He served the meal he'd prepared, talked about his day, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed his world was perfectly intact. And I listened, or at least I pretended to, even though my mind was miles away from the warmth of that room. Every bite I tried to take felt heavy. The food was seasoned the way I used to love, but it tasted muted, almost bitter, as if my body rejected the comfort it once found in his cooking. I nodded when he spoke, but I kept feeling the distance between us stretching wider with every passing minute. He didn't notice. He didn't sense the shift in my voice or the stiffness in my posture. He existed in a version of the night that still belonged to him. But I lived in the quiet space beneath it, an awareness that something irreversible was already in motion. I kept glancing at the clock above the stove. Each minute pulled me tighter into my own chest. 7:30, 7:45. The air felt still, almost too still, like the pause before a storm breaks open. My heartbeat was steady, Not from calm, but from a strange acceptance of what was about to happen. By the time the minute hand approached 8, I wasn't even listening to him anymore. I was listening to the silence between us, waiting for it to shatter. And just as the clock reached 8 p.m., I felt the night shift, as if the entire room was holding its breath for what came next. When the doorbell finally rang at 8 p.m., the sound cut through the room like a blade. It was soft, almost polite, but it carried the weight of everything I already knew. Marcus froze beside the sink, his body going still in a way that told me his mind had leapt to the very place he hoped I would never look. I didn't say anything. I simply stood, letting the chair slide back slowly, and made my way toward the door with a steadiness that felt unfamiliar, almost foreign, even to me. Each step down the hallway felt deliberate. I could feel Marcus's eyes on my back, a quiet panic starting to build behind him. When I opened the door, the hallway light spilled over a young woman who looked far too nervous to be standing at a married couple's home. Tessa Malone. Her expression shifted the instant she saw me. Shock first, then guilt, then the kind of fear that comes when the truth finally outruns denial. I stepped aside and let her see Marcus in the doorway behind me. His face drained, his composure collapsing all at once. In that moment, no words were necessary. The air itself carried the truth between us. I invited her inside with the same calm I had carried all evening. I handed her a thin, disposable cup of water, while placing 2 porcelain ones on the table for Marcus and me. The difference between them said more than anything I could have spoken aloud. Tessa couldn't meet my eyes. Marcus couldn't look away. As I sat down, the silence thickened around us. I could feel the emotional weight settling in the room, heavy and inevitable, as if the walls themselves understood what was happening. All 3 of us knew there was no going back. When the front door finally closed behind Tessa, the apartment fell into a silence so heavy it felt physical. Marcus sank onto the sofa, his shoulders collapsing inward as if the truth had knocked the air out of him. I watched him bury his face in his hands, trembling beneath the weight of everything he had done. But I felt nothing that resembled the woman I once was with him. Whatever love I had poured into our marriage had expired long before this night. I was only now admitting it to myself. I walked to the console table and lifted the stack of evidence I had gathered. Screenshots, transfers, timelines, all the pieces that painted the story he kept trying to hide. Looking at it, I felt an unexpected steadiness. There was no rage left, no plea for explanation, just clarity. My love had turned sour, and I refused to keep swallowing what had already gone bad. Hours earlier, I had tucked a small suitcase in the bedroom closet, sensing that I might need it. Now, as I pulled it out and zipped it shut, I felt the quiet certainty that this chapter was over. Marcus looked up when he heard the wheels roll across the floor, his eyes red and desperate. But I was already gone in every way that mattered. I stepped out of the condo without looking back and drove toward Greensboro, where Lauren lived. She opened her door before I even knocked, giving me the kind of steady embrace that holds you together when you're too tired to hold yourself. In her apartment, surrounded by the scent of eucalyptus and the warmth of a familiar friendship, I told her everything, not with tears, but with the calm of someone finally speaking the truth out loud. By the time I finished, we both knew the next step wasn't emotional, it was strategic. And together, we would make sure the consequences found their way to the man who thought he could hide from them. On Sunday morning, Lauren and I spread everything across her dining table. Printed screenshots, bank transfers, saved messages, and a rough timeline I had pieced together in the hours after leaving Charlotte. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of her refrigerator. And that silence gave me room to think clearly for the first time in weeks. The ache in my chest had dulled, replaced by something steadier, almost grounding. I wasn't rebuilding my life yet, but I was reclaiming the truth. We organized every document by date, lining up the patterns I had ignored for too long. The late nights, the unexplained charges, the messages that spelled out exactly what Marcus had been hiding. Seeing it all arranged in front of me like a case file shifted something inside me. Heartbreak had turned into clarity, and clarity felt like power. As we drafted the email to his HR department, I focused on facts, not emotion. Dates of policy violations, evidence of inappropriate conduct with a subordinate, transfers that crossed ethical lines. I wrote it all with the calm of someone who finally understood that telling the truth wasn't vindictive. It was necessary. When the report was complete, I sat with my finger hovering over the send button. For a moment, I let myself breathe, acknowledging that this single action marked the start of consequences he created, not consequences I authored. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability. I pressed send, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. And just like that, the silence in the room shifted. Something had begun, and I knew the ripple would reach him soon enough. On Monday morning, Lauren's contact sent the first update, and I felt a stillness settle over me as I read it. Marcus had been called into a meeting without warning. I could almost see him walking down that hallway, confused at first, then uneasy as he noticed the HR director waiting with a folder thick enough to speak for itself. I pictured the moment he sat down and recognized the screenshots, the transfers, the messages he thought were buried. In my mind, I watched the realization wash over him, the quiet collapse of a man finally meeting the truth he created. By midday, another update came. He had been suspended pending investigation, escorted out of the building by security. His co-workers paused their conversations as he passed, some shocked, some whispering, all witnessing the fallout he had set in motion. I didn't feel triumph, just a heavy kind of understanding, like watching a tower fall after years of unnoticed cracks. Tessa didn't escape the consequences either. Her internship was terminated the same afternoon. I imagined her tears, her panic, her sudden understanding of how deeply she had entangled herself in something she wasn't prepared to carry. It wasn't my job to save her from that. As the day unfolded, I sat quietly in Lauren's living room, letting each update settle without celebration. These weren't victories. They were reflections of truth finally given shape. By evening, I felt a steady sense of closure begin to form, an understanding that accountability had run its course, and my story had one final chapter left to write. The morning of the divorce hearing felt strangely quiet inside me, as if every emotion had already burned itself out long before I walked into that courtroom. I remember sitting at the table, steady and detached, while the judge reviewed the filings. Marcus looked smaller than I had ever seen him, weighed down by the months that had unraveled his career, his reputation, and the life he thought he controlled. I didn't feel anger anymore, only a calm certainty that this chapter was ready to close. The proceedings moved quickly. The condo was ordered to be sold, and from our portion of the equity, the loan my parents had given us had to be repaid in full. What remained barely made a dent in Marcus's mounting expenses, and I accepted my share without sentiment. The numbers no longer represented a shared dream. They were simply the final pieces of a story, ending exactly as it needed to. Weeks later, I signed the lease for my new condo, a quiet place in Greensboro that felt untouched by the life I left behind. I filled it slowly, choosing what deserved to follow me and letting everything else stay in the past. Peace arrived in small ways. Morning light on my kitchen counter, evenings without tension. The sound of my own breathing in a home that felt like mine again. Then, one Friday afternoon, my director called to share that I was being promoted. I felt something inside me lift, a reminder that even after devastation, life has a way of offering new ground to stand on. Looking back now, I see the woman I used to be and the one I've become. Betrayal didn't break me. It rebuilt me. It taught me boundaries, reminded me of my worth, and pushed me toward a life rooted in truth rather than illusion. If you've ever had to choose yourself after being hurt, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. I read everyone, and you never know who your truth might help.